Your Honor, she has no legal claim to this property. None. He said it like it was already over, like I wasn't even sitting 3 feet away. He really believed that, right up until the judge opened that folder. My name is Delanie. I'm 34 years old, and that courtroom moment didn't happen by accident. It happened because of 6 years of quiet, exhausting, invisible work that my brother Terrence never bothered to notice and never thought to fear. I'm a paralegal at a mid-size firm downtown. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a corner office or a title that impresses anyone at family dinners. What I do have is an eye for detail, a habit of keeping records, and the kind of patience that only comes from watching other people's families fall apart in legal disputes and quietly promising yourself you'll never be caught unprepared. I grew up in that house, the one on Carver Street with the wide front porch and the oak tree in the backyard that my father planted the year I was born. When Dad's health started declining, I was 28. Terrence was living across the country, building his career, buying his condo, living his life. I don't blame him for that. What I blame him for came later. I moved back home. I paid the property taxes every year. I handled the plumbing repairs, the roof patching, the HVAC replacement. I negotiated the refinance when interest rates dropped. I drove Dad to his appointments, filled his prescriptions, sat with him through the nights when the pain made it hard for him to sleep. Every receipt, every invoice, every bank transfer, documented, filed, and dated. I wasn't the one they threw parties for. I was the one who stayed. And apparently, that made me a threat. If you've ever been the one who sacrificed, the one who gave up years of your own life to take care of someone who needed you, and then watched other people show up only when there was something to gain, this story is for you. Have you ever given everything for your family and still ended up with nothing to show for it? Subscribe to this channel and tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone in this. Click hype or give this a like, and let's go. My father passed on a Thursday in October. The house was quiet in a way I'd never felt before. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. The kind that fills your chest and just sits there. Terrence flew in for the funeral. He wore a dark gray suit, shook hands with people he hadn't spoken to in years, and cried at the right moments. 3 weeks later, he called me. Not to check in, not to ask how I was holding up. He called to talk logistics. "I've already spoken to a real estate attorney," he said. His voice was calm, matter of fact, like we were discussing a shared storage unit, not the house our father lived and died in. The property should be sold and split 50-50. That's the fair thing to do. I asked him about the 6 years, the taxes, the repairs, the caregiving. He didn't hesitate. "That was your personal choice, Delanie. It wasn't a legal contribution. It doesn't change what the estate is entitled to." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just went very still. A few days later, I found out he'd already filed a legal claim on the property. He was listing himself as sole heir based on a photocopy of a will our father had written years before his diagnosis. An old document, outdated, superseded. But Terrence didn't know that yet. Then came the Zoom call. He scheduled it without telling me what it was about. I logged on and found myself looking at 12 family members. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all waiting. Terrence had his camera on, sitting at a clean desk, looking prepared. He spent 20 minutes painting a picture of me as someone who isolated our father, controlled his finances, manipulated him in his final years. "She isolated him," he said, his voice carrying just enough sadness to sound convincing. "She controlled the finances. We all saw it." Some people nodded. Nobody pushed back. I sat there with my hands flat on the desk so nobody could see them shaking. I didn't say a word. I just closed my laptop. Later, I found out the call had been recorded and shared in a family group chat I wasn't part of. He had been building that narrative over a year. That call wasn't a family meeting. It was a setup, and I had walked right into it. The week after the Zoom call, I noticed I couldn't send messages to the family group chat anymore. I had been removed, quietly, no announcement, just gone. My cousin Brianna called me by accident, I think. She mentioned something about the house showing, and I stopped her. What showing? There was a long pause. He said you already agreed to sell. We thought you knew. I hadn't agreed to anything. Terrence had brought a real estate agent through my home while I was at work, through my father's home, without a word to me. I stood in the kitchen after that call and looked at the floor my father used to shuffle across every morning in his slippers. The smell of that house, old wood, and the faint trace of the cedar sachets Dad kept in every closet, it hit me differently that day, like I was already being erased from it. Then came the financial piece. Terrence's attorney filed a motion claiming I owed the estate money for living in the property rent-free. 6 years of rent, they argued, tens of thousands of dollars. Never mind that I had paid every single bill, never mind the taxes, the repairs, the insurance. None of that counted in their version of the story. My mother, who had remarried and moved to Arizona years ago, gave a comment to a family member that made its way back to me. Delanie always made everything so complicated. Terrence just wants what's fair. That one stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. Then my card was declined at the pharmacy. A small joint savings account my father had set up for both of us, a few $1,000s he'd kept aside for emergencies, had been quietly closed, my name removed, the money gone. I stood at that pharmacy counter and kept my face completely neutral. The woman behind the register looked at me with soft eyes. I told her I'd pay cash. I kept going to family events. I know some people reading this are wondering why, but I wasn't ready to disappear. Not yet. At my aunt's birthday dinner, Terrence stood up and gave a little speech. He talked about honoring Dad's legacy, protecting what he built, making sure the family's history was respected. Then he looked around the table and said, "Some people confuse being present with being entitled." He smiled when he said it. A few people laughed. I was the only one who didn't. I drove home alone. I walked into the house and went straight to the hall closet. I pulled out a box, a large, worn banker's box I'd been adding to for months. Folders, color-coded by year and category. I set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long moment. Not yet, I said to myself quietly, but soon. What Terrence never knew was that I had spent 6 years documenting everything. It started as habit. Working as a paralegal, you see what happens when families fight over estates without paper trails. You see how quickly memory becomes unreliable, how easily words get twisted, how hard it is to prove something everyone swore they witnessed. So I kept records, not because I was planning for a fight, because I knew that without paper, the truth doesn't always survive. I had every property tax receipt going back to when I first moved home. I had contractor invoices for the roof, the HVAC, the bathroom remodel. I had dated photographs of every major repair, timestamped on my phone. I had bank transfer records showing 6 years of consistent payments flowing from my account to the household. But the most important thing in that box wasn't the receipts. In my father's final months, he had come into the office quietly one afternoon. He didn't tell me ahead of time. He just appeared, sat down across from a notary affiliated with our firm, and signed an updated will, witnessed, stamped, properly filed. That will left the house solely to me, and it included a written note in his own words acknowledging the years I had given to his care. Terrence's entire legal claim rested on a photocopy of a document that no longer meant anything. He didn't know the updated will existed. He didn't know it was sitting in a sealed legal record, untouched, waiting. There were also 3 voicemails. My father's voice, slow and clear, thanking me. In one of them, he said, "I'm going to make sure the house stays yours, baby. You've earned it 10 times over." I had saved those voicemails to 2 separate backup drives the month he passed. He built his whole case on a document that had already been replaced, and I let him keep building because the longer he talked, the worse it was going to look for him. 6 weeks until the court date, and I hadn't told a single soul what I had. I finally went to Patricia on a Tuesday afternoon. She's a senior attorney at our firm, in her 60s, sharp as anyone I've ever met, semi-retired but still fully licensed. She had mentored me for years. She knew how to read a room, a document, and a person, all with the same quiet precision. She hadn't pushed me to talk about the situation. She'd watched it unfold from a distance, the way Patricia watches most things, carefully, without rushing to conclusions. I set the box on her desk without saying much. She went through it methodically, folder by folder, the receipts, the photos, the bank transfers, then the updated will, then the voicemails, which I played from my phone. When she was done, she looked up at me. "Delanie, this isn't just a strong case. This is an airtight case. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I told her I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't just being emotional. She shook her head. "You were being a paralegal, which is exactly why you're going to win." She agreed to represent me. No fee. Her exact words, "I've watched families do this to the wrong person one too many times." We spent the next 4 weeks preparing. We organized the documentation by date and category. We had the updated will authenticated through the notary's official office records. We formatted the voicemails with timestamps and had them certified as evidence. Then a letter arrived from Terrence's attorney. Bold language, 30-day deadline, vacate the property or face additional legal action. He thought it was over. Terrence texted me directly that same week. "This doesn't have to get ugly. Just sign the quitclaim and we split clean." I read it. I put my phone down. I didn't respond. The night before the hearing, I sat in my father's old armchair in the living room, the one I'd reupholstered myself 2 years ago in a dark green fabric he picked out from a catalog. The house was still. I could hear the oak tree shifting outside in the wind. I sat there for a long time. "Tomorrow," I said, just that one word, out loud, to nobody. The hearing room smelled like recycled air and old carpet. I noticed that immediately when we walked in. Terrence was already seated with his attorney. He had on a new suit, charcoal with a faint pipe stripe. He didn't look at me when I came in. He was performing calm and doing it reasonably well. His attorney opened with confidence. Clean delivery, organized argument, the photocopy of the original will submitted as Exhibit A. He spoke about the family's intention, about equal distribution, about the estate's rightful division. It was polished, I'll give him that. Then Patricia stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She never does. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit the authenticated, notarized will dated 14 months after the document opposing counsel just presented." The room shifted. I felt it before I saw it. Terrence's attorney asked to approach. The judge allowed it. There were a few minutes of quiet, just the sound of papers and low voices at the bench. Then the judge read one line aloud, one line from my father's updated will. His voice was flat and measured. "I leave the property in full to my daughter Delanie, whose sacrifice made this home worth leaving." Silence. Terrence's chair scraped back slightly. "That can't be real," he said. His voice was different now, thinner. "She made that up. She works at a law firm. She could have manufactured the whole thing." The judge looked at him. "The notary record is verified and predates your filing by over a year. Counsel, do you have anything substantive to add?" His attorney said nothing. Patricia then placed the financial documentation on the record. 6 years of payments, taxes, repairs, every invoice and transfer. Not because the will alone wasn't enough, but to permanently seal every possible exit from that courtroom. Terrence turned to me for the first time all morning. His eyes were somewhere between fury and something I almost recognized as pain. "You knew. You knew this whole time and you said nothing." I looked at him steadily. "I learned from the best. You taught me that in families like ours, you let people finish before you respond." The judge ruled in my favor. The house was mine, fully, legally, solely mine. Terrence sat motionless while his attorney quietly packed his briefcase. Patricia reached over and shook my hand. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out of that building into the cold afternoon air. No tears, no celebration, just stillness and the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement. Terrence was ordered to cover a portion of the legal costs. The family found out about the Zoom call recording he had shared, about the narrative he had constructed and distributed. Some of them were embarrassed. A few reached out to me privately, short messages mostly. "I should have asked you first. I'm sorry I didn't call." I responded to some of them, not all. That evening, I drove back to Carver Street and sat on the front porch as the sun went down. My mother called. I watched her name on the screen until it stopped ringing, then set the phone face down on the porch railing. 6 months later, I repainted the front door a deep navy blue. I started a small garden along the back fence, tomatoes and herbs, things my father always said he wanted to grow but never got around to. I enrolled in a part-time law program that starts in the fall. I didn't cut everyone off, but I became very intentional about who gets access to me, my time, my home, and my trust. My father didn't leave me that house because I was the favorite. He left it to me because I was the one who showed up every single day, without being asked, without being thanked in public, without anyone watching. That's not entitlement. That's a record, and records don't lie in court. Did a family member ever try to take something that was rightfully yours? Money, property, credit, an opportunity you built with your own hands? I want to hear your story in the comments. These situations are more common than people admit, and nobody should have to fight them alone. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, and click hype to help this reach the people who need it most. Standing up for yourself when the people opposing you are your own blood, that is one of the hardest things a person can do. If you've been there, subscribe and become part of this community. Let me know this story helped you by clicking hype, and tell me where you're watching from. I mean that. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and I love knowing that somewhere out there, someone felt a little less alone today.